Hi friends, today we'll be discussing factors affecting rate of transpiration and stomatal movement. It will be the last lecture in transpiration since we have understood the basic aspects of the transpiration, mechanism of stomatal opening and closing, and we'll have to understand now what are the factors which are affecting the transpiration as well as the rate of the transpiration as well as the stomatal movement. It will be very easy for all of us to understand now since we have understood the basic aspects of transpiration, and it will be very easy to understand now what are the factors which are responsible for affecting the rate of transpiration. In this video, we'll be discussing factors one by one, external factors as well as the internal factors. So we'll be discussing first the external factors. So external factors include light. So light, it increases the rate of transpiration by inducing stomatal opening, because stomata opening is regulated by light. So when there is a light, stomata is open. That means there will be rate of the transpiration will be high when the stomata is open. It acts in several ways. First, it produces sugar in guard cells due to photosynthesis. Light has a role to play in photosynthesis. And secondly, in light, during its photochemical reactions, there is a generation of ATP which called as photophosphorylation. So all these are responsible for potassium transport into the guard cells. Whenever there is a potassium transport in the guard cells, plus in presence of light, the carbon dioxide will be used for the production of carbohydrates. So there will be a decrease in the carbon dioxide concentration in guard cells. And also there will be less carbon dioxide available in the intercellular spaces of leaf. So this will result the rise in pH. So there will be an alkaline pH which promotes production of malic acid. So once malic acid is produced there will be the dissociation of malic acid into protons, and that will facilitate the potassium proton ion exchange pump. We have already discussed it during our previous lectures. So it will result once there is more entry of potassium inside the guard cells, which will result in osmotic entry of water inside guard cells. So there will be an endosmosis. As a result, it will cause the opening of the stomata. So in presence of light, stomata is open. And we have already seen that blue and red light of visible spectrum have an effect on the transpiration. That's why we call it as the transpiration spectrum. And it favors stomatal opening. More is favored by the blue than the red light, but both are responsible for the opening of the stomata. Blue light stimulates proton ATPase at guard cell plasma membrane, which is responsible for taking the protons from guard cells into the epidermal cells and exchanging them the potassium. So it pumps proton across the membrane, generating an electrochemical potential gradient across the membrane. And that provides a driving force for ion intake or influx of potassium. This mechanism we have already understood, that whenever there is a movement of protons from guard cells to this, simultaneously there will be an influx of potassium ions from epidermal cells to guard cells. So turgor is built up in guard cells due to endosmosis from epidermal cells, and stomata opens. So this is the role of the light in opening of the stomata. So definitely we have understood it. By this diagram, let me refresh your memory. We have seen that these are the epidermal cells, this is the guard cell, and in presence of light, starch, and it is changed to phosphoenol pyruvate. In presence of PEP carboxylase, combination of carbon dioxide with it, that is the carbon dioxide utilization, there will be formation of malate, and malic acid will form the malate as well as the proton. Protons are exchanged to epidermal cells. In exchange there will be actively, and in exchange there will be potassium. So potassium and chloride ions will be taken inside the vacuole. It will increase the osmotic potential or the solute potential of it, As a result, what will happen? There will be a movement of water from epidermal cells into these cells. That means water will move from these epidermal cells to guard cells by means of endosmosis. And the result there will be that the turgidity will be more in the guard cells. That will have an impact on the less thin walls. More thick walls will be bulged inside, and the stomata will open. This mechanism we have already discussed. So that means the light has a role to play in the opening of the stomata, and definitely it will increase also the rate of the transpiration. So rate of transpiration also increases with duration of light. Light on leaves gets converted into heat because incident radiations once falls on the leaf, it's converted into heat, and which favors evapotranspiration because there will be a more heat load on the leaf, and to get rid of that heat load, the plant will go for more evapotranspiration. There will be more evapotranspiration from the leaf when the light is there. So different wavelengths of light influences stomatal movement. So light wavelengths also, it varies among the plant species. Tobacco leaves exposed to red light and UV light radiations fail to open stomata. Green light is totally ineffective in opening of stomata. Bright moonlight often also induces stomatal opening in some plants. So in dark, no transpiration takes place due to closure of the stomata. So that means the light as a factor has a role to play in the opening of the stomata, and definitely it has a role to play in the transpiration rate of the. So there will be more transpiration rate during the light periods. Second factor is called as the temperature. So rate of temperature generally increases with an increase in temperature. It's directly proportional to the temperature. Rate of transpiration is directly proportional to the temperature. Rate of transpiration up to certain limit, but see, high temperature in the range of 5 to 30 degrees Celsius enhances the rate of evaporation. It also induces the enzyme activity. For every 10 degrees rise in air temperature, rate of transpiration is doubled. We can say the Q10 is equal to 2. Vapor pressure increases become double, and relative humidity decreases up to 50%. So that means under this temperature there will be an increase. 5 to 30 degrees there will be more transpiration rate, but temperature above 30 to 35 degrees causes stomatal closure in some plant species. So possible reason for midday closure of stomata in many plants. That's why, because during the midday there is a more heat load on the plant, and it leads to the closure for few hours, one hour or one and a half hour, and then ultimately the stomata gets open. So midday closure is possibly because of the rise in the temperature at the midday, because the incidence of light is directly on the leaf. So temperature has a role to play in the opening and the closing of the stomata, and also it influences the rate of transpiration. Temperature affects rate of transpiration in many ways. Difference in water concentration between, see, we have a leaf. A leaf is in the air or in the atmosphere. In the open air, it has there will be two sides. One will be the leaf air that is the leaf air which is in the spaces, and the external air. We will see it in the next slide. So driving force for water loss is absolute concentration difference. What will be the difference between the two sides of the leaf? Vis-a-vis it is air, external air and the internal air. So it lowers whenever there is a more temperature, it lowers the relative humidity of the atmosphere. See, in the atmosphere, we have a water vapors. When we see the relative humidity, that means in relation to the saturation, 100% saturation of the atmosphere. If an atmosphere has a 100% saturation of we call it as it is humid. When we see the relative humidity, that will be higher or lower than that. Yeah, lower than that. So it causes a change in vapor pressure deficit of air. Whenever there is a more temperature, there will be the difference that will cause the vapor pressure deficit of air. Because on the side, when the temperature is high, the air will be dried, and there will be more vapor pressure deficit on the two sides. It allows the vapors to pass out quickly from leaf interior. When there is a dryness on the outside of the leaf, vapor pressure is less, and inside the vapor pressure will be high. There will be a diffusion from inside to the outside. At temperature 38 to 40 degrees Celsius, stomata in Zeberina open even in darkness. These are the exceptions. But overall, we have seen the temperature, it affects the rate of transpiration. So by creating a difference in the vapor pressure, we call it as the vapor pressure deficit of the air. See, it can be explained with this. We have seen already the anatomy of it. This is the anatomy of the leaf. This is the external air boundary layer. This is the cuticle. This is epidermis. These are palisade parenchyma. These are spongy parenchyma. They have air spaces within it. This is the lower palisade parenchyma, lower epidermis, interrupted by means of certain two guard cells. And then this is the lower boundary layer, air boundary layer. And there is a space which is called as the inner space within leaf spaces. This is the leaf spaces, and this is the outer space now. So we have now outside and the inside. So water vapors from the inside and the outside. And in addition to this, you will see there is the boundary on this side. This boundary, air boundary will be there. This air boundary will be there on the upper epidermis. So air boundary also air boundary also causes the as a barrier. So whenever there will be a high temperature, this air boundary is always with the moisture. So that moisture, if it is more temperature, that moisture will become less. As a result, vapor pressure difference, there will be more vapor pressure inside, and it will come out through the stomata. So that is the effect of the temperature, so that this leaf has a cooling effect. That will be done by means of the transpiration. So temperature has an effect. We'll be repeating this slide again because we'll have to understand that time there is a resistance on this side as well as the resistance on the inner side. So you have a leaf stomatal resistance, you have a resistance which is the boundary resistance for these vapors to move out. Then you have an atmospheric humidity as an external factor. In terms of relative humidity or H, the rate of transpiration is inversely proportional to relative humidity. I have already mentioned relative humidity means it is a relative term. See, atmosphere, if it has 100% saturation, in relation to that, whether it is less or more than that. So when we say relative humidity, inversely proportional, that means if outside, the higher the relative humidity, lesser is transpiration, because outside there is higher relative humidity. That means there is more saturated air with moisture. That is called as the higher the relative humidity. So when there is more saturated boundary layer, there will be lesser transpiration. When the atmosphere is humid, rate of transpiration is reduced. Definitely there will be no vapor pressure diffusion. The lower the relative humidity, that means there is a drier situation now. Dry atmosphere is outside. Lower the relative humidity, higher is the transpiration. That's why we say it's inversely proportional to relative humidity. So in dry atmosphere, relative humidity is low and air is not saturated with moisture. What will happen then? There is an increase in the rate of transpiration because there will be more vapor pressure, more vapor diffusion from inside to the outside. This is as per the relative atmospheric humidity or relative humidity is concerned. So it operates under the influence of water pressure deficit, as we have already mentioned, prevailing on the two sides of the leaf interior and outside air. As I said, leaf has an outside air and the interior space. So in humid weather, this deficit remains low. When there is a humidity on the outside of the leaf, that time there will be more moisture available. That time this deficit is low. As a result, water diffusion is very slow. It diffuses out very slowly. So rate of transpiration remains low. When there is a humidity on the outside of the leaf, that time the rate of transpiration is very low. One more factor, which is the carbon dioxide concentration. We have understood that low internal carbon dioxide concentration plus light is needed, because it will be operational in the photo, it will be used in photosynthesis, plus good light favors stomatal opening, because it increases the pH, it becomes basic, which favors the synthesis of malic acid. Whenever there is a low carbon dioxide concentration inside the leaf, that favors diffusion of carbon dioxide from outside to the inside. And high internal carbon dioxide concentration and less light favors closure. So when you have low carbon dioxide concentration, that time it will favor diffusion. When you have a high internal carbon dioxide concentration, it favors closure. High atmospheric carbon dioxide concentration favors stomatal closure. High internal and atmospheric carbon dioxide concentration reduces transpiration rate. Because when there is high internal carbon dioxide concentration, stomata closes. When there is high atmospheric carbon dioxide concentration outside ambient, in the ambient, that time the stomata will be closed and it will reduce the rate of transpiration. But when the stomata is closed, whatever will be the external carbon dioxide concentration, whether are high or low, it's not going to have any influx on the stomata or the rate of transpiration. That's when the stomata is closed. One more factor, which is an external factor, is the atmospheric pressure. Atmospheric pressure, the high you go, the pressure is less. Rate of transpiration is inversely proportional to the atmospheric pressure. Again, if there is a reduction of pressure from 1 to half atmosphere, it will double the rate of transpiration. That is why the plants which are growing on the top of the mountains or on alpine zones, on higher reaches, they have higher rates of transpiration. And that is why in those plants you experience they have a modified, they have adopted to those conditions. They have modified plant structures, which we say they are called xeromorphic modifications. That they have a thick cuticle, they have sunken stomata, though they are growing on alpine zones or on the top of the mountains. Since at top of the mountains the pressure is less, whenever there is a less pressure, there is more transpiration, more diffusion pressure will take place there. That's why the plants which are growing on the top of the mountains or on the alpine zones, they have definitely a xeromorphic modifications to reduce their transpiration. This atmospheric pressure. And then there comes the next, that's the availability of soil water. Less water in soil and less hydration in leaves leads to closure of stomata. We have already understood it. Under water stress conditions, whenever there is a water stress condition in the soil or within the plant, within the roots or within the leaves, there is a more production of ABA, abscisic acid, which increases in leaves as well as roots of the plants. And we have seen the role of the ABA in the stomatal closure. And it leads to the closure of the stomata. Non-availability of the soil water will cause the closure of the stomata. That's why we call ABA as a citrus hormone. Thus, during non-availability of the water in the soil, there will be less rates of transpiration also, because it's blocking the active excretion of the proton from guard cells. There will be instead there is potassium efflux from guard cells. This leads to the exosmosis. So वहाँ पे influx के बजाय there will be efflux. As a result, there will be an exosmosis from the guard cells that will lead to the closure of the stomata. This is considered as a defense mechanism in plants. To check water loss during water stress conditions, continued transpiration and inadequate supply of water often leads to permanent wilting in plants. And whenever there is under stress conditions, the continued transpiration and there is less supply of water, that can lead to the permanent wilting in certain plants also. One more factor which is called as the wind velocity or the air moments. Now again we'll have to see the leaf vis-a-vis the atmosphere, the air currents in the atmosphere. Whenever there is an increase in wind velocity, it causes increase in the rate of transpiration. Due to transpiration, the air around the plant is saturated with water vapor. So whenever there is a transpiration around the leaf, it remains saturated. But when the air currents are there, the air surrounding the leaf is, if it is subtle and thick, it prevents water loss due to boundary layer resistance. That means whenever the leaf is having the wind outside the leaf is subtle, it's not moving, and it will be the leaf layer, it will be very thick, air surrounding the leaf will be thick, and it will prevent water loss because there will be a more boundary layer resistance. Boundary layer resistance will be there, resistance RB, there's resistance boundary layer. Wind movement continuously replaces water saturated air by drier air. Whenever there are the wind movements, that will replace the saturated air, water saturated air, which is saturated with water, by the drier air. It reduces the thickness of the boundary layer. So as a result, this resistance, boundary layer resistance, is lessened. So what will happen? It will promote the diffusion of the water vapors from inside to outside through stomata from leaf interior to the outer atmosphere. So it promotes increase in the rate of transpiration. But there is one thing, when you have a very high wind velocity, which is very violently going on, which is having a 40 kilometers per hour, it often induces stomatal closure. That can be due to rapid loss of water, dehydration of the guard cells, or it creates a hindrance in the outward diffusion of the water vapors. So it doesn't allow the water to come out. Sort of a defense mechanism in the plants. High wind speed also leads to mechanical shock of guard cells. As a result, under this condition, rate of transpiration is reduced under very high wind velocities. So wind as a factor, minerals in the soil, deficiency of potassium ions or chloride ions favors stomatal closure because they are very two important mineral ions for opening and closing of the stomata. Deficiency of nitrogen, phosphorus and potassium, they also have an effect on the opening and closing of the stomata. Stomata movements become sluggish when there is a deficiency of nitrogen, deficiency of phosphorus and potassium, they become sluggish. Another factor which is called the growth hormones. So there are endogenous plant growth hormones like as cytokinins which participate in opening of stomata. Abscisic acid actively participates in closing of stomata. Cytokinin helps the guard cells in the intake of potassium. Ion exchange occurs, stomata opens. And while as ABA under water stress condition blocks proton ATPase of guard cells. As a result, no ion exchange takes place and stomata closes. This we have seen repeatedly what's the role of the hormones, especially the abscisic acid. pH also has an effect on the opening and closing because high pH in the guard cells, it favors opening, basic pH. Low pH, when acidic, it favors closure of the stomata. Mechanical shock, various types of shocks such as rough handling of leaves, injury to nearby tissue leads to closure of stomata. So there are certain mechanical shocks, even high velocity are also called in the mechanical shocks. These were some external factors which have a direct effect on the opening and the closing of the stomata and also on the rate of the transpiration. There is also the internal factors now. They include morphological, anatomical, physiological factors within the plants which affects the rate of transpiration. First of all, you will have to see the transpiring area, our leaf area. Rate of transpiration is directly proportional to the total surface area of the leaves. Transpiration rate is high in leaves having high stomatal frequency. More the stomata, more will be the transpiration. So transpiring area has an impact on the rate of transpiration. Leaf anatomy. Modification in leaf structure, especially when you have a thick cuticle in the leaf, you have a sunken stomata, a presence of hairs or waxy coatings on the surfaces, developed palisade, mesophyll, etc. They check the stomatal transpiration in xerophytes. So leaf anatomy also leads to the reduction in the rate of the transpiration, especially in the xerophytes. Leaf orientation also has an effect on the rate of the transpiration. If leaf is perpendicular to the incident light, there will be more heat load on the leaf. That will lead to the rate of transpiration is more. If leaf is parallel to the light, effect is minimum. Less rates of transpiration because there will be less heat load. If you will see in case of eucalyptus, leaves hang downwardly during hot periods of day. They avoid overheating. As a result, in eucalyptus, during the hot periods, there will be reduced rate of transpiration. That means leaf orientation also plays a role in the rate of transpiration. Leaf modifications, we have seen some leaves have modified structures. Some leaves are modified into spines, even to thorns, to scales. All these structures lead to the reduction in the rate of transpiration. Then one more factor that's called the root-shoot ratio. Root-shoot ratio means the number of the roots in relation to the shoot. Rate of transpiration is directly related to the rate of water absorption by the roots. Water will be absorbed by the roots, and the rate of transpiration will be equal to that. More the roots, more transpiration will be there. So root-shoot ratio means the ratio of the surface of root system. How much is the root system there? Sometimes you will have the more root system and the less shoot system. That's why what will be the effect there? To that of the shoot system. So we have a root-shoot ratio, means the ratio of the surface of root system to that of the shoot system. Higher the root-shoot ratio, greater is the transpiration, and vice versa. Parker found it. So if you take an example here, sorghum is a plant which is a very small plant than the maize. But being a small, it has a high root-shoot ratio. It loses more water than the maize. Otherwise, the maize plant is larger than the sorghum. Sorghum is a plant, small plant. But in case of the sorghum, you have a secondary root development that is more advanced in sorghum than maize. That is why there is a more evapotranspiration. Though it is a very small plant, but it has a more root-shoot ratio. One more is the internal water condition. Though we have already seen it, deficiency of water in the plants leads to decrease in rate of transpiration. Optimum transpiration occurs in leaves with sufficient moisture. Leaf with low water content brings down rate of transpiration because water vapor pressure turns low inside the leaf. As a result, when there is less water vapor pressure inside the leaf, that will favor the closure of the stomata. With this, we have seen that there are present the factors which are some external factors and some internal factors which has a bearing on the opening and the closing or the stomatal movement. As a result, they also show an impact on the rate of the transpiration. It can have a high rate of transpiration or it can have a low rate of transpiration. I think in this video tutorial, we have summed up the transpiration, and I'm sure that you have understood the transpiration in detail now. Hopefully in the next video, we will be going through the mineral nutritions and phloem transport. Till then, be safe and be happy. Thank you very much for the patient listening.